Well, thank you so much. We've got an awesome attendance today, and I'm really excited for this webinar. It's one where I think I'm gonna, I always learn things from speaking with Casey and Jesse, and I hope that the folks who are joining us today will be able to learn something as well. I'd love to start just by, sharing what is the future of curriculum lifecycle management? What is the purpose of what we're talking about today? What I really see it as is I wanted to bring together two of the folks that, Casey at Weber State. Casey was one of the first people that I ever spoke with when we were founding Coursedog back in early 2018. He's sat with us for an unbelievable number of hours, giving us insights into higher education, into how all these different business processes work. And he's still, even though he now has a newborn, is now a father and has a newborn baby, I literally have to stop my team. I have to drag them off of calling him. So that's how I met Casey. And then I'll speak a little bit to Jesse, and then I'll give it to you guys for introductions. But and Jesse as well has spent an insane amount of hours with our team, working with Stanford as we've deployed, curriculum and catalog, and has so many forward-looking insights into where the future of curriculum management looks like. And I wanted this chat to really be a brainstorm, a discussion where we could all sit around and talk about what is curriculum, life cycle management, curriculum, schedule, et cetera, going to look like in 5-10 years. But I'll give it to Casey. Do you want to go first and sort of introduce yourself to the folks that are joining us?
Yeah. So Casey Bullock, and that's a very generous introduction there. And I've been at Weber State University for about 15 years. And Weber is a public institution. We have quite a number of students, about 28,000, and it's a really kind of a different type of institution. We're a dual mission. So we serve a community college function in addition to a university function. So we have everything from certificates, associate's degrees, all the way up to a doctorate degree, a doctorate in nursing. We only have one doctorate degree, but it's been a really interesting place to work at. And I started off in transfer recruitment, and then I moved over to the registrar's office, and then been in the registrar's office ever since, and just been innovating and trying to find different ways to make higher education work. So it's been a good time. So
Jesse?
So I have worked at Stanford for just over 2 years now. I've only been on the Stanford campus for a year because I've spent the other half, as probably many of you have, working from home. But I've worked in registrar's offices or in IT and higher ed, supporting registrar's office for almost 15 years. I started at the University of Nevada, Reno, and moved to Harvard, and then now I'm at Stanford. And throughout the entire time, I've been primarily working with the curriculum scheduling and enrollment side of the house, either implementing ERPs or working particularly in curriculum and scheduling and trying to integrate all of these different systems that we do to try to make the student user experience what we want it to be. And so this has just been kind of my passion area for a very long time. And it's been really exciting to get to work with the team at Coursedog, who is actually thinking about new ways of doing things and re-envisioning how we look at the process from the particularly not only the student perspective, but the faculty perspective as well.
Awesome. I think Jesse, do you want to start by just sharing a little bit about, Stanford Today and just a high level overview?
Yeah, sure. So Stanford Today has about 15,000 students, and it's primarily a graduate institution. Most of our students are graduate professional students, and we are a PeopleSoft school. They've been a PeopleSoft school for almost 15 years now, just over 15 years. We are in the process of implementing both curriculum and catalog, and are looking towards next year also doing the class schedule, We are in the beginnings of a big project within the registrar's office to look at the entire student user experience for academic planning and enrollment across the board. It is a pretty big deal. It's not something that's gotten a lot of attention at Stanford in the past, and it's something our registrar, Johanna Metzgar, has felt really passionate about. And she came recently to Stanford. She's been here about 2.5, nearly 3 years now, and she came from Berkeley and is bringing that vision with her, and has gotten a lot of buy-in. The challenges that Stanford has is it is a very decentralized institution, and we tend to find that, and it tends to be very common on the curricular side, that a lot of the curriculum aspects, the ownership of courses tends to be at the faculty level. So it's a very department process, a department-owned process, and different collections of faculty approach their curriculum in very different ways. And so that balance has always been, you know, how do you respect that individual nature, but build something that is a very central and cohesive product to present to students. And so that's one of Stanford's biggest challenges, is how do you unite this very decentralized organization, but still produce a cohesive product at the end to share with the students and the public at large.
Jesse, that's such a good, you know, I'm sure that a lot of folks who are in the crowd right now are nodding their heads about this. How do you create centralized policies or rules while also having a very decentralized nature on campus? For anyone who has, I got too excited and I jumped forward, but for anyone who has questions, or, you know, wants this, you know, I want this to be interactive. So as we go along, in the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom, there is a chat button. And so, you know, we've got an awesome attendance today. I don't know that we'll get to all the questions, but feel free to just interject with questions as we go along. But I'll give it to Casey.
Okay, well, as I mentioned before, Weber State is a public institution. We're part of the Utah System of Higher Education. And so we're a regional campus, is kind of what's more defined of what we are. We have a dual mission of serving both the community college function and a university function. So it does make it a little bit challenging because we're dealing with a broad spectrum of students. We have students who are high achievers, and we have students who have, it's the first time they've ever walked on a college campus, and how do we help them get through this system? And that's always a question that I've asked myself, is a student walks on the campus, how do they even know how to register? And we have some of these students that they're the very first of their family to graduate, and trying to support them through that and helping them understand the bureaucracy of an institution is a bit challenging sometimes, but that's what makes it exciting. And so, as I said, we have pretty close to 30,000 students. Part of that group is actually concurrent enrollment. We have about 10,000 students in concurrent enrollment that we serve also. And so not only are we got a broad spectrum of students on our campus, we're also serving high school students. And we're a banner school. We've been with Coursedog as a scheduling for the scheduler partner, and we're just implementing that now. And so, yeah, it's been kind of an interesting process. As I thought we were decentralized in a lot of ways, but when I hear Jesse talk about Stanford, we're probably compared to Stanford, we're more centralized than decentralized compared to that, because we do have some governing bodies above us that want centralized scheduling. In fact, the Utah System of Higher Education and our legislature said you will have a centralized scheduling office, and we didn't. Our departments actually do the scheduling and set up the classes, but there is some slight level of control over that of how does that work and how do we put that in, and it's not, they can't function completely independent. But how do you serve all entities and give freedom to do what they need to do, while also having it feel a bit centralized and achieving an overall vision and goal for the institution. And that's something that I learned real quickly as a registrar. Don't pretend that you know the situation of every department on your campus. They're all unique, they're all different, they all have different needs, and you can't just say everybody's the same and you're all going to do it the same way, because you'll quickly learn that that's just not true, and you'll get pushed back. So so we're semi decentralized in a way, but our departments do create their own schedules and their own curriculum, and it goes through a process for checks and balances, but it's more driven from the department than it is driven from the institution.
Awesome. So for those of you that, I'll do a quick introduction of myself. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Justin Wenig. I'm co-founder and CEO of Coursedog. My story really started at Columbia University when I became frustrated while trying to enroll in a computer science class I wanted to take. Became really curious about the way that schools like a Columbia or a Stanford or a Weber State built their curriculum, whether using PDFs for updating curricular offerings, or online course catalogs from a legacy vendor or a PDF, and scheduling on spreadsheets, but then likely having a room optimization. And I just wondered to myself, why wasn't it that all these processes were linked to each other and talked to each other, and schools had a good sense of course demand and other things that are sort of important as we think about building student-friendly curriculum and student-friendly schedules, because that is sort of that, what from my perception as a student was the most important thing about my higher education experience was ultimately the specialized curricular product that I was, getting. So, Coursedog, what I want to talk about is this concept that we would call curriculum lifecycle management, right? And I think that when folks wonder what we're talking about today, I'd say that this is almost the beginning of it. I'd argue that this is a much broader scope than even what we've defined here. But what I think I'm particularly interested in talking about is, for those of you that are here and are thinking about, what does the process look like on my campus of proposing a new course or program, publishing it to students, scheduling it in a way that supports student success, doing all these processes efficiently, and then in the long run, somehow enabling data to, inform us in a positive way, right? Whether you're centralized, decentralized, whatever. Where does this go over the next 5 to 10 years in a post-COVID world? How do we get more of our systems to talk to each other in a positive way? And what are the key challenges that a lot of institutions, even that have products like Coursedog, still experience on a day-to-day basis, right? And I'm hopeful that this conversation will sort of surface some of these important conversation points. A little bit about Coursedog before we dive in. Coursedog, we do the curriculum lifecycle management. So today we really, we manage curricular and catalog processes for institutions like Stanford, scheduling for institutions like Weber State. And our big vision is really to create this whole curriculum lifecycle management platform, eventually incorporating maybe some more of that academic planning and enrollment things that Jesse mentioned, some things maybe around connecting this data so that we can accurately surface course demand. And so personally, I'm really interested in these questions because our vision is really to help schools, drive student success with their curriculum. And this is a conversation that I try to have every day with every one of our customers, and that I'm just so excited for. Okay, so I'd love to dive in, first question, and I don't know, Casey, if you want to go first. We talked, at Coursedog, we sort of define curricular success as, a combination of the positive impacts on students, administrators, and the institution that results from streamlining any of these processes, right, that are associated with the development of a curriculum. How do you think about defining and measuring curricular success?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to kind of ponder about, because my academic research is in degree efficiency. How do you get students to graduate efficiently, and what does efficient mean in this sense? And in a lot of the ways, efficiency, as I defined it in my research, was having students graduate with the least amount of excess credit. So if my degree is 120 credit hours, how do I get students to graduate with 120 credit hours? But there's a divergence here on what's the purpose of higher education. And it kind of divides between getting a job and having a transformational experience, having that experience where they grow and explore and learn who they are as a person, and have their ideas challenged in a lot of different ways. And I think it's both. It can be both, getting a job and having that transformational experience. And so when we really talk about the nuts and bolts of curriculum, is our curriculum doing what we want it to do? Are they making them employable, and are they having that transformational experience? And so from a philosophical standpoint, it's like, well, how do you define that and how do you measure that is really kind of a more difficult question. But when we get down to it, we break down the components of curriculum, where we have major requirements, we have gen ed requirements, we have minor requirements, and what those all come together as a degree. And are we getting out of our own way as an institution? And so this was the question that I really wanted to deal with, was if a student isn't graduating efficiently, or if they're not going through our processes and sequence of courses efficiently, is it them or is it us? And that was a really kind of difficult question to answer, because students do have their behaviors, and it's really easy to say, well, the student's just not following the plan. They're not following the process. But we have to look at ourselves and say, are we making it more difficult for students to get through? And what data do we have that can help us understand that? And some of the things that come up is these roadblocks that happen of curricular roadblocks, that students just can't get into a class. And I think, Justin, you couldn't get into a computer science class that was stopping your progression, that made you have to change what you were going to do that semester. And it was kind of a question that I wanted to answer. It's like, well, how often are we doing that to students? And is there a way to get to that? And so if I was to put a bow around that and put a package around that, is that the students that we are able to meet the supply and demand for students to achieve their degree or educational goal, whatever that is. And so that supply and demand equation is where I would start to measure that curricular success. Do we have the classes that they need when they need it, at the point that they need it, is where I define that. And I still don't think I have an answer to that question.
Yeah. Neither do I. That's great. Jesse?
I think one of the areas of curricular success that, Casey reminded me of was an experience that when in the institution I used to work at, we went through. There's an institution-wide approach where the institution felt it was important that each program built out its recommended 4-year plan, because 4-year graduation rates were so low. So it was felt that in their catalog, they wanted to see, if you were going to get a degree in geology or a degree in math or a degree in art history, what was the department's recommended sequence of courses to graduate in 4 years? And it didn't exist until that time. And some departments found out that with the course requirements that they had, it was impossible. The way they were scheduling their courses, or the way that the courses they were using from other departments in the schedule they were building. And we had one department that actually would take 5 years, and it was a complicated program because you're getting a teaching credential as well as something else. And so there were good reasons behind it, but it was very enlightening to the campus to go through that process as a whole to realize that the structures that we were putting into place, because we had, as a group collectively, not done the basic exercise of building out a 4-year plan for students. We expected the students to go do this. It was very enlightening that it wasn't possible, because the schedule was always seen and is still seen, I think, among faculty across many institutions as kind of the faculty purview. The faculty are choosing when they want to teach within the guidelines of the institution, and most institutions have some variation of a standard meeting pattern. Many departments are expected to build a schedule that's balanced. Many institutions have rules about the number of schedules and prime time, but not many institutions think more broadly than that, coordinate more broadly than that, look at their degree program and say, we're requiring our students to take this course in chemistry, this course in math, and requiring these 3 courses within our department. So when is chemistry and math scheduling their course, and when are we scheduling ours? Mm-hmm. And actually asking the question to think more broadly, can my student actually take what I'm recommending them to take? Mm-hmm. And so we often think in simple terms of curriculum of the course as the building block. And are they exploring enough? Are we, the excess credit is a really big, important issue. But we are often, in Casey got to this, is how are we scheduling it? How are we putting it together? And what is and is not really faculty purview versus what are we doing in the best interest of our students? And where can we coordinate better? And that is a very complicated piece, because it requires coordinating among these silos of academic departments, which are typically areas that you don't historically coordinate across. And in some areas you do, like the biggest freshman courses of, the calculus, the physics, the chemistry, which are the large, and computer science is a couple of the institutions I've worked at most recently, the intro computer science course has become one of the big freshman intro courses. Those large ones I start to see more and more often coordinate their schedules, because those provide the biggest time conflicts. And so you see some of that interdepartment collaboration, but on a bigger level, it's rare, and our tools historically have not made that easy. And I think that's where there's great opportunity for us in terms of streamlining the curricular process is not only asking for that data, but then using it to highlight, these 5 departments are recommending these courses at the same time. Are they being scheduled in conflict? Mm-hmm. But it requires more and more smarter systems and more smarter algorithms. But we now have the technology and the resources to throw at the situation to really make this more of a problem that is manageable. Whereas previously, pen and paper, not doable, right? Yeah. We offer Stanford schedules 20 plus thousand sections a quarter. Now, to be fair, a good chunk of those are independent study. And I think there's over 5,000 that actually meet, but trying to, do that in any other way but via an algorithm is virtually impossible. But those are the kind of that next level, that area that we need to push into is, asking what are recommended schedules, and then how do we balance exploration with recommended schedules and requirements, and that balance where, particularly at Stanford, as a liberal arts institution, we don't want to have lockstep programs. We want to have exploration. So how do you manage that too? And so there's that nexus, which is kind of what makes this job fun. So
I love the way that I think you both touched on. I mean, Casey, you said this concept of the roadblock, right? And Jesse, you mentioned this concept of it's so difficult to think about a recommended schedule or a recommended approach if things are happening on pen and paper, right? And one of the things that I as a side note, that I found so interesting when we first approached this at Coursedog was we went to so many schools, and our first idea was like, we're going to give everyone these awesome analytics and like AI and like all this great stuff, right? And people were like, I'm doing this on paper today. Like, it was such a funny, and you know, I always came back to that because I think I reckon, you know, a huge part of getting to the mental space and the place, I think, where you can be innovative, right? And where you can start to use data is when you have that automation, that visibility, right? That trust about what can the central folks do and what can the decentral folks do. And I almost see it as, I often think that like Coursedog is like the first block, like what Coursedog is today is like the first block in like actually making things better, right? Like it's awesome. So many of the tools that are in the space are so good at streamlining. And I still see that there's gaps in making things better. And I just think, you know, I think that's a great segue into, you know, how has COVID impacted the way that you folks are thinking about this next 5 to 10 years? Is it more tackling of roadblocks? Is it more data? Is it AI and ML? How are you thinking about, like, wave a magic wand, what would the future look like?
You know, COVID has been an interesting thing. I think if I hear the word unprecedented again, I'm gonna like purge that from my vocabulary now. But it is in that sense that it is something that we've never dealt with before. And what I appreciate, not the virus or the destruction that the virus has had, but I appreciate the disruption. Higher education needed a disruption. And we tend to, in higher education, say, this is how we do it. This is how we've always done it. Don't challenge me on this. My class cannot be taught that way. It cannot be brought online. I just can't do it online. And so when you have something like COVID happening, disrupting all of higher education, where it's like, no, you have to move this into an online and asynchronous or a synchronous type of format, but it's got to be online. It really challenged our faculty and what we thought we knew about our curriculum. And what we did learn from that is that there are some courses that just cannot be taught online. They require labs, they require more of an interaction. But we did find that some courses absolutely can be taught online, and maybe we can increase the acceleration of that course in a way that it might not have to go the full semester. So that's one of the things we started to look at is like, well, can we do, we have a full semester, first block, second block, first half, second half of the semester is kind of how we're structured. And we started to say, what can we put in the first half? What can we put in the second half? And actually our MBA program, within probably weeks after we had to switch, they were already thinking from this entrepreneurial mindset of, this is a new way that we can do things. Can we get degrees out to a broader spectrum of people, out to these rural areas that don't necessarily have the ability to come to a campus? Can we get out to these other areas and provide an education that we didn't think that we could do before, because we were stuck in the tradition that the student had to be on campus. So I think COVID in a way has had a seismic shift for higher education, because it's really disrupted our thinking, and we can no longer say that, well, it can't be done that way, because now that we've been forced to do it that way, we know that it can be done that way. So now let's come up with a different argument of why you don't want to do it. But I think some faculty are like, oh no, this works great. I was scared of doing it, but now I can do it. And so it's actually provided us more options than just the traditional model, but it also introduces some additional challenges. One of the big things that I had with my faculty and what I experienced with myself was, now that I'm in an online environment, I feel like I've got to assess my students more often. And so the students were feeling like, would you stop with the quizzes? Would you stop with the papers? Like, But I'm like, but no, I need to know if you're learning something. Um, and so it became a challenge. And so now as we look 5 to 10 years down the road, I think we're going to start to figure that out a little bit better of like, how do we better assess students in an online environment versus the face-to-face environment? And now that we have tools like Zoom or Google Hangouts or Microsoft Teams, those different types of products, if this pandemic happened 10 years ago, we would be in a worse situation than we are today. But because the technology advanced enough that we could pull off some of these things and make that shift, I think now as in higher education, we got to now start to think, well, what are we going to do with it now? And I think there was a question there, is like, do you think the shift to online learning as a norm will take a while for schools to adjust to? It seems like there's some hesitancy from some colleges, and as somebody posted, there's a yes and no. I think there's some schools that will jump on it, and I think it's actually down to departments. They'll jump on that and say, no, we're going to make a shift, and we're going to provide a different way that we're presenting our curriculum to our students. But I think there's still going to be some that are hesitant and they don't want to change. But as more institutions make that change, they're going to be forced to go down that direction. So yeah, my ramblings on that. So yeah.
No, that was great. That was awesome. Yeah. Jesse, you want to?
Yeah, I think Casey is spot on. Stanford historically has, except for continuing education and a very small group that embraced online ed, there was this sense that the Stanford education model is, our value is in our in-person interaction with faculty, right? And you can't replicate that online. And then all of a sudden, and we're on a quarter model, so we sent our students home 2 weeks before the end of our winter quarter, and we moved our spring quarter completely online, literally about 2 weeks, a week or so prior to the start of the spring quarter. And so we had an entire quarter. It wasn't in the middle, it was right at the beginning, where faculty had to make the decision, can I do this online or do I have to cancel it? And we had maybe a quarter that they had to cancel because you can't move quickly online, all those labs, etc. And then we've spent the bulk of this year largely online. And what we've learned, a lot of our academic departments that thought they couldn't teach online found ways to teach online. They're sending out lab kits to students. They're teaching basic chemistry to students. Now they have a lot of rules about what they can and can't send, but they found ways to create lab kits to send to students to do experiments in their homes. We have some engineering classes that found partners to send 3D printers to students for projects and doing some other things creatively, which is amazing. And I think one of the best things it did was teach all of our faculty at once, how to use online tools very quickly. But what it's left us with in the conversations that we're having now, and we have a division at Stanford called Learning Technologies and Spaces, and they're starting to have these conversations with our dean's offices and our faculty leadership around the school, is what does this mean for how we offer courses moving forward? Because the thought is there are some parts about online teaching that are good and we may want to keep. There are parts about accessibility for students with mobility issues. There are parts about teaching to very large classes that are solved or improved. We found a use for this room that has wall-to-wall screens where it got redeployed as a lecturing room for large classes, where they did the wall-to-wall screens. They zoomed in 3 different Zoom sessions for large lectures, where you could have almost all of the student faces up at once and be lecturing to hundreds of students on a wall and see their faces. And the faculty were reporting a much better teaching experience than Zooming to that same couple 100-person lecture on their laptop, because now they had this interactive experience. And so they're repurposing that room for large Zoom lectures this spring. And now they want more rooms like that. So we've got to accommodate, which, is a bonus to have. But what it also means is possible impacts for systems on how we schedule in person, because maybe it's no longer, is it all online or is it all in person? But are they going to want to start blending? I'm going to do some of this online and some of this in person. And most of our systems aren't kind of designed that way. So what are these new models going to be? What is that new blend going to be? And my worry is, are my systems going to be a barrier to some of these new pedagogies on how do I set these up? How do I schedule these? How do I manage these resources? If they want to have an in-person discussion every other week or on some random times, and most of our scheduling systems are set up to meet weekly or to have our standard meeting patterns, and they're either all in person or all online, but now we're going to do something more selective because we still have space constraints due to COVID social distancing, or because they're doing more of a hybrid where they're sharing a room and these days this class is going to use it and these days this other one is, in an odd pattern. And how do we manage those more blended models? Those are some of the interesting ways that we're starting to have conversations now about what does that mean in terms of, how do we schedule in the future, and what parts of that onlineness are we going to take with us? And I think that disruption is absolutely right, because we've embraced some of those changes in our academic calendar too for next year. Some of those things that we changed, and when we open enrollment, how we open enrollment, some of the changes to how we do sessions and some other factors, we're keeping those. We're hanging on to them because they were good. They did some benefit for us. But also comes the fact that some of these things may be harder to adapt to than others. So how do we make sure our technology supports the good as well? So
I love both of those. The theme that I got on both of those was just how much opportunity there is for positive change, right? In this post-COVID world. I have a funny short story, and then I know that we'll zoom through the next couple of questions, but back in, I think, 2018, very early in Coursedog, I met and went to go speak with a friend of mine who's very high up at Coursera. And I came to this meeting and I shared with them our vision to help, schools sort of build these better curricular processes to schedule more effectively, et cetera, et cetera. And they actually looked at me in this with this very befuddled face. And they explained, we at Coursera, we looked at this in the past, we've looked in the past about like why higher education does the way that they do things. And, our opinion is that faculty are going to schedule whatever faculty want to schedule, and that's the way it's always going to be, right? And I was really shocked by that at the time, in the sense that, I think there was a grain of truth to it, that there is so much of higher ed is faculty driven, right? So much of the content is with that sort of student faculty relationship. But what I see now in this post-COVID world is when we've done these experiments that no one thought would work, right? No, the vast majority of faculty, probably did not want to do this. And a small, I'm sure there are a handful of them that said it actually did work in one form or another, is perhaps we can adopt a little bit more of experimentative, perhaps entrepreneurial mindset about the way that we're thinking about our curriculum, right? And perhaps this can allow us to be much more student focused, right? Because what are we all doing if it's not to ultimately serve others and to make our students more effective with what they want to do? So it's a great bridge into how do we think about prioritizing the student in a world where we're revamping these curriculum management processes. And I hear a lot of schools today, I wanted to give a couple examples, personalized catalogs, degree maps, course demand projections. There's a lot of sort of buzzwords, I think, about how folks are thinking about student-friendly curriculum management. But I'd love to hear a little bit from your perspectives about the things that you're thinking about on your campus?
Justin, do you want to take that one first?
It's a big question.
So for me, my personal area of interest is in student decision making, and primarily focusing on the data students use to make decisions. It's always fascinated me, the data that students think are valid and the data that we think are valid, and then how do we build a culture around that? And I personally believe that students are going to find whatever data they can get their hands on to help make sense of the massive catalogs and schedules that we have. They're trying to get through. They're trying to build. So when we look at the term, and this is where I think many schools, and it's in higher ed in general, we overlook the importance of building a schedule. We look so much into planning your 4-year plan so that you can graduate in 4 years, but we overlook the importance of building a successful term schedule. You know, the importance of balancing work life, the importance of making sure you have breaks, the importance of balancing courses that are heavy in P sets versus reading and writing requirements, understanding a student's strength in what types of classes they engage in. So knowing courses that are very heavy in certain types of pedagogies versus others. Those are all data embedded in a class schedule that you don't get in a 4-year plan. And where different sections of the same course may have different faculty who focus on different things, and understanding the nuance of that is important. And we tend to overlook that, I think. And so for me, it's about understanding that nuance and finding ways to collect that data to help validate that data and provide more information to students so that they can compare and contrast and build successful term schedules. Because, you know, in my work and research in the past, you know, successful enrollment continues with successful enrollment, and that's how we keep them going. Right? Getting them done in 4 years is important, making sure we don't have barriers, but having that successful term is so critical too, and making sure that they have the data they need to build that schedule, I think is so critically important. And I think at times we don't do enough to provide good comparative information about picking one section over another. And it can get political because you're pointing them towards one faculty over another, and doing that in a way that involves faculty, that involves helping them understand why we want to share specific data, and involving both faculty and students about what data are meaningful to compare and understand. And you know, getting to that point, that's where, at least for me, that's kind of where my passion lies. And there's way more to that question. Like there's so many different areas that can be focused on, but that's my little area that I'm really interested in.
Yeah, I can agree to everything that you just said there, because there's so much to unpack in that question in itself that I think that that's a day-long conference type of question. But so a thought came to my mind when this question came up was a couple of years back, a member of the student government, after one of the meetings that I was in, and this person was in also, she pulled me aside and said, "Hey, is it possible to list the learning outcomes of the courses in the catalog?" And so a couple of thoughts went through my mind. I was like, wow, well, aren't you the overachiever on learning outcomes and wanting to know that type of stuff? And the other thought was what, you just don't want to take the easiest class? I thought that's what all students did, was just they didn't want, what's the easiest pathway? And I think that that's kind of a myth, that students are wanting to take the easiest pathway. I do think that they've thought through what they do want to take and how does that lead to where they want to go with their career aspirations or what they want to do after they get done with their degree. And so this idea of more data that they can kind of look at and say, well, is this what I'm really wanting? And then the other thought that I had was the who, what, when, why. Which teacher do I want to take? When do I want to take it? Where do I want to take it? And then why is that class important according to their curriculum? And so there's really something that I'm trying to get to is how do I get that feedback loop from the student to say, what are you wanting to take? Like, if I can just know what you want to take the next semester, then maybe we can provide something for you. If we can know what direction that you're wanting to go. And that feedback loop really hasn't been developed very well because everything is kind of isolated. My degree evaluation system is isolated from my catalog. My catalog's isolated from my course offerings and my registration system. It's like they're all siloed out, and that's where I need to get that interaction between each of these systems, that it's one cohesive system that's giving me information back as a faculty member to say, what do I need to teach next? What's working, what's not working for our students, what's my student's pathway, and information back to the student to say, here's a good pathway. Because I think you hit on something there, Jesse, where the toxic schedule. I had a student that registered for physics, calculus, chemistry, and an English class all in the same semester. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, you're not going to be successful with that type of schedule. And even if you're the highest, you're a top learner, you've aced the ACT, you had a 4.0, you did all the API classes, all that type of stuff. That's still a difficult schedule to get through. And how, and can we say, throw up a red flag and say, let's break this out a little bit. Let's change this up, or this is going to be a highly writing intensive semester, that you need to balance that out, because let's mix some other things in there that can provide balance to your schedule. And those are things that it was really difficult to get to the students. We can try to get to them at an advising appointment, but not all of our students are going to advising appointments. For us, we have a lot of these first generation students that they don't know that that's a toxic schedule. They don't have a brother or a sister or a parent to say, don't do that, balance it out. And so the big question with this is to prioritize it for the student. How do I get the feedback loop from the student? What information can I get back from the student to say, what do you need? How can I provide it for you?
I think it's so interesting that you mentioned the need for sort of this interconnectedness. And Jesse, you mentioned sort of the need for the holistic view of this student's decision-making process, right? And how they want as much information as possible, right? And I always thought it was so funny, as a, starting from sort of a technical background, when people started talking about things like, how do we, project the course demand and the pathways, my mind, like I think I said in the beginning, I immediately started to think about like artificial intelligence and like these crazy algorithms and stuff. And like, the funny thing that as I've gone deeper into this, that I've sort of noticed, it's like, why don't you just ask the student, like, why don't the two, the systems just talk to each other and just literally ask the student what they want to take? And it's so funny that like, this is not like, there's not really anything, there's no product on the market that, and I'll say this openly, including Coursedog, that will just simply both tell you what the students want and let you schedule it in the same place. It's like, what? Like, how is that possible, right? It makes, and that, I'll disclaimer, that's like our vision at Coursedog. But I think it's just such an interesting problem. And I guess, skipping forward to sort of the second to last question here, and I think we can expand this beyond just what traditional scheduling, cataloging, curriculum be. How do you think the process of sort of breaking down silos in the process of creating the curriculum creates better outcomes for us as both students and administrators?
So this is something I've struggled with, is how do I break down those silos? I think technology is a way that you can break down the silos, but I think we have to go beyond what we understand our current technology suite is going to be. because the way that we've evolved over the years. And so at one point we had students lining up in a gym with a card to register for a class, right? And so we said, let's get that to an online phone system or something that can make that process a little bit better. So we solved that problem. And then we're like, okay, let's solve the catalog. We're mailing out these giant catalogs to all these students, and let's put it online. So we put it online, and then we need something to tell the students what they've already completed for advice. We created a degree evaluation system. All these things have been built in a silo itself, but we haven't taken a step back to say, what is the system that we need that is not siloed, that is talking to each other? And so can the catalog be the degree evaluation system? Can the catalog be also the curriculum management system? Have we underestimated the power that the catalog could be because we siloed that off? And can we bring that back in and integrate it again to have that as the home spot that's where the students go? And what we're finding is that our students are going to our degree evaluation system more than our catalog. And that's problematic because there's good information in the catalog that they need to know, but how do I get them back? And so I need those two things to merge together. I need all of these things to kind of be centralized into one spot to where it looks like one system, one cohesive system that is providing that. I think with just what we have right now, it's difficult to break down those silos without that technology.
And I think I'll push Casey's concept, I think, one step further. I think these silos are structures on old print models. Like we used to print a catalog and then we printed a schedule multiple times a year. And so when we started developing technology, we developed these technologies to replace a printed catalog. Then we developed technologies to replace a printed schedule. And we kept the mental model that these are separate, right? And only at a few places I know of that they never printed them separately are they actually one thing. But that's because they designed them as one thing, because that's what they printed, is they printed one thing. And so I think breaking down the silos is really kind of abandoning that 100-year-old concept of a printed bulletin doesn't need to be in technology. We don't need to recreate the printed version because technology gives us so many tools to break out of that barrier. We need to challenge some of those preconceived notions of what we're trying to recreate, because by hanging on to what that is, and to be fair, we're challenged and our legal office says, this is our contract, we must have it this way. Our VA, we have to give a copy to the VA every year because the VA requires it. But, one of the design things in Coursedog is we can have multiple catalogs. So why can we not just extract that data in the part that our legal office and the VA needs this legal version? Great, but that's not the one that we have students interact with. Here's the legal extract that we have for whatever the legal requirements are, but let's have a student interaction one that then pulls the data from everywhere and is a different user experience. And maybe it's not called a catalog schedule anymore, but that is a fully integrative experience that pulls this data together, because the student needs the data from all of these when they're making decisions about the schedule. They need to know the repeat policies, which are in the front matter of the catalog generally. They need to know about what is their degree 4-year plan. Well, that's usually in their program part of the catalog, or maybe they need to know which requirements they've completed. Well, that's in their degree audit system. All of this they need when they're trying to schedule, choose the classes that they're trying to enroll in. And so I think if we really want to do that next level, that push, is to get rid of those old silos of thinking, which really stem from just what were we printing back in the early 1900s, and that we've translated into the digital world, and break down those digital barriers and rethink what do we produce as registrars. what is this content? We like to call it, one of the phrases I do is that the registrar's office does advising at scale. Like we have our academic advisors that do one-on-one. That's not what we do. We do advising at scale because we provide all of the information that students need, and that we're the advisors for students that don't meet with their individual one-on-one. So we've got to do a really good job of making sure the information is crisp, clear, and understandable and accurate. So we do it at scale, and the one-on-one advising happens elsewhere. And so that's a big responsibility kind of to take. So yeah.
I'll share one small nugget, and then I think we're up on time. This was such an engaging conversation. You're totally right. I think both of you that we could have gone on for a day about this. This is such a broad topic, but and we had awesome attendance. So I'm really appreciative for everyone for joining. But one thing I just wanted to mention is I think when it comes to this interconnectedness, one of the challenges that I find so many folks, we talked about how hard it is when you have paper-based processes to think about making things better, right? And, even with these siloed different tools, everyone knows that integrating with student systems is difficult, right? It's a known, that is not a lot. That is not something that we will ever say is easy, right? And having to manage all these different integrations, and then sometimes integrations between the different tools, I just think sometimes creates so much friction that it makes it hard sometimes for a school to innovate. And then the one other thing I'll say is something that I always laughed about when I looked at this was when you look at so many different higher ed products in the space of what you're talking about, whether it's students looking at their plans or degree maps or catalogs or schedules or whatever, the core concepts are so similar, right? It's forms, it's workflows, it's the entire workflow of, building a schedule on one side or the other side. And sometimes I think it can just be so confusing when you've got, multiple tools or multiple faculty sets to train folks on and et cetera, et cetera. But, anyway, I just think it's something that I'm really interested in too, because I think there needs to be more interconnectedness. But Casey and Jesse, I want to express my utmost gratitude for joining today, and for all of us who joined here. Thank you so much. We had an awesome, I'm sure that Casey and Jesse, is it all right if folks want to, send you folks emails, or I don't know? Okay, great. Yeah. So I'll drop to anyone that wants their emails, happy to provide it to them. And thank you everyone for joining, and have a great rest of the day. Bye everyone.